These videos often start with a disclaimer because I think it's important. The aim of personality types, or any kind of typing system, is to create these archetypes that capture the essence of most people. And these ranking videos, by virtue of their generalized and theoretical nature, can often fall more into stereotypes than archetypes. So it's useful to bear that in mind when listening. If you want to go more in depth on the individual types, then there are plenty of videos on this channel that you can check out. Okay, let's start with most likely to get married. I'm not entirely sure about the logic here because, by definition, when a person gets married, they get married to another person of another type. Also, the prevalence of marriage is something that changes over time depending on societal norms. Right now, it's probably at a relatively low point, I would imagine, compared to times in the past, at least in Western societies. That could have the effect of pushing personality types to extremes in this regard. The types who are naturally more inclined towards getting married might seek it out as some kind of refuge from a modern life. Other types might feel entirely liberated by it, to the point of not being pressured into it at all. I don't think it makes sense to have an unlikely category on here for this one, just because it's still an, annoyingly, standard thing for people to do. Let me pick some weird groupings here. I think that the EP types, so ESFPs, ESTPs, ENFPs, and ENTPs, are all quite likely to get married. Now, that's probably kind of surprising, not least because younger EP types often find the idea of getting married kind of unthinkable. They tend to be quite chaotic and freedom-loving naturally. As a result, being in a stable relationship is something that has a fantastically grounding effect on them. They are perhaps the best beneficiaries of that kind of complementarity with someone who is strong, steadfast, and reliable. So I think that all of these types are likely to get married. Staying married, that's another issue that we'll get to. I'm going to put them all, maybe surprisingly, in likely. Okay, so this next group of types, ISTJs, ISFJs, ESTJs, and ESFJs, all to a certain extent value stability. Not because they see it as inherently better, necessarily, but rather because it allows their strengths to flourish more. Firm footing is the best foundation to build lasting things from, something which they're great at. So either they'll value structure and stability, or people and stability, depending on which type. A healthy relationship offers that, and I think these types are going to be good at maintaining relationships well. They're all grounded, practical, and for the most part, no nonsense and no drama. Nonsense can be quite a detrimental thing in relationships. I think I'm going to put them all in highly likely as a group. ENFJs and INFJs make their way in the world through relationships, and both of them as a result might feel a strong sense of imbalance in them being givers to a fault. I think that ENFJs are slightly more likely than INFJs to get married. INFJs are more introverted and can tolerate having less relationships in their life, but I do think that both of these types need that, and ideally healthy ones. ENFJs are more in the serial relationship kind of group though. I think I'd put ENFJs right at the top in highly likely, but then INFJs in likely. Okay, so INTJs and ENTJs, they both tend to be focused on goals to the point where relationships can take a back seat. However, they do both value their relationships seriously as well, perhaps too seriously at times even. I think I'll put them both in sometimes, since relative to other types, they might be more distracted by their career and/or their approach might be a bit too business-like at times, which can cause problems in relationships. Okay, INTPs and ISTPs, definitely both independent, so it will take the right kind of person for them to gel with, usually someone fairly easygoing and laid back, someone non-pressuring and unobtrusive. I mentioned this in a recent video, but INTPs are more willing and interested in being looked after by people in a physical sense. They don't really mind that at all. Outsourcing that stuff can be highly desirable for them, actually. ISTPs, not as much. They value that physical independence as much as their intellectual free-thinking independence. I'm going to put them both in sometimes. INFPs and ISFPs, when they find the right person or right people, they will be ultra committed. It's like their loved ones become a part of them somehow. The question is whether they're likely to find those people. That's much more tricky. Plus, there's a big price to be paid for becoming attached to the wrong person. If that happens early on, then that can burn them in relationships and make them much more guarded going forward. Since finding the right person is not always straightforward for them, I'm going to put them both down the bottom in sometimes. Okay, let's do most likely to get divorced. So the EP types, ESTPs, ESFPs, ENFPs, and ENTPs, although they might be naturally inclined to get married, staying neatly within the confines of a long-term relationship might present difficulties. So I have this trait of taking a glass of water to bed with me every night, and I struggle to remember a time where I've actually drunk it. Yet, as soon as the thought crosses my mind that I don't have it, I feel compelled to get one, just in case. This is the unusual and sometimes paradoxical nature of perceived scarcity. If you feel like something is suddenly not on offer anymore, it suddenly obtains an allure. You are drawn to it almost instinctively. This is something that I think all of the EP types struggle with, and it's not difficult to see why this might lead to many divorces, so I'm going to put them all in likely. This might be very surprising, but out of the 4, I think that ESTPs are the least likely to get divorced. Unlike the 3 other types, they aren't going to be possessed by some hugely exciting new idea that might be unrealistic, nor are they going to have these moments of intense emotional individuality that might just explode out of them. Yes, they do seek sensual and sensory variety, but SE is a function that can be satisfied through indulging in the same pleasures over and over if they enjoy them. Nonetheless, all 4 of these types are characterized by a certain level and desire for variety. They want to experience new things, and when they're in relationships, that can sometimes mean new people as well. Okay, ENTJs. I would say that close interpersonal relationships can be their Achilles heel, and kind of their only big issue really. Relationships, sadly, are not an exact science. You can have the objectively best strategy and plan, and it still doesn't work out. Any ENTJ listening to that would have thought, well, if it didn't work, then by definition it wasn't the objectively best strategy. I will revisit that notion in a future ENTJ video. I'm going to say that ENTJs are in the likely category. One thing that I'm curious to explore more is the relationships between types. If you are someone who is an ENTJ, also married to another ENTJ, then definitely let me know down below in the comments. So ESTJs, on the other hand, I think actually belong in the unlikely group. They can still have issues in relationships when it comes to the emotional part, but that's going to be kind of compensated for by other traits that they have, namely their commitment to stability. The more reliability they can have in their life, the better in their view. Almost like their life is a beautifully constructed machine that ticks along efficiently, smoothly, and without any dramatic fuss. I'm going to put ESTJs on the bottom in unlikely. Similarly, I think ISTJs and ISFJs are also unlikely to get divorced. This isn't because they're attached to the known and the familiar blindly, not at all, but rather because they value what they already have and will work on that a great deal first before taking a risk or shaking things up, which they often find to be kind of reckless and unnecessary. Making big sweeping changes in life for them is more of a last resort kind of thing. Many relationships have rocky moments, well, all relationships do, but many of them also survive once you get past those phases. ISTJs and ISFJs are capable of weathering those storms, exercising patience, and just not being overly reactive. It's something of a stoic approach, so I'll put them both in unlikely. I think that INTJs and INFJs have some similar tendencies. They're more likely to have a vision for their relationship, the potential of what it could be. That is something that can drive both of these types, sometimes to an extreme degree. I can see them both being bothered actually that the relationship doesn't live up to that ideal sometimes. These two types will go about things in a very different way, but kind of to the same end. INTJs bring into existence their vision either by putting into place systems and structures that aid the relationship, whereas INFJs might try to psychoanalyze their partner in huge detail and work around that. Although INFJs are often not described this way, I would say that both of these types are problem solvers. Although the human side of a relationship is obviously crucial and central, often relationships break down because the structure isn't right. Some of the basic building blocks and foundational components aren't set up in the right way. And although INTJs can be kind of cold and detached superficially, I think they understand people very well. So I'll put both of these types, by virtue of how much effort they'll put into the relationship working, in unlikely. ISTPs. ISTPs are a difficult one because if you manage them in the right way, then you're going to have zero issues. They'll be exceptionally chill, loyal, and committed to the relationship. Their tolerance for feeling smothered, boxed in, and controlled is very low, though. They're probably the most independent type overall. That's a mistake that loads of people and types will make with them. To be fair, though, it can be quite jarring to contend with this independence, which can often seem like a detachment to others. People are likely to take it personally when it isn't. I'm not saying that ISTPs are faultless in relationships, no one is, but I think the blueprint for dealing with them is kind of straightforward actually. It's more about what not to do, because they're just people who don't need much from you often. I think for this reason, I might put ISTPs up the top in likely. INTPs will have similar issues, but because they are less likely to jump into things, especially relationships, it's more likely that they'll be with someone that has a decent chance of working out, since they will have assessed them in great detail before taking any kind of big action. I think I'll put INTPs in sometimes. They love the comfort, routine, familiarity, and stability that good relationships can offer, and that's not something they'll be in a rush to give up. ISFPs can be individualistic and fiery. They have a similar kind of independence to ISTPs, albeit a different flavor of it. I can definitely see their nature leading to a certain amount of volatility. That's often a problem for high FI types, holding on to their individuality as much as possible, and sometimes too much. Often that needs to be sacrificed a bit to make a relationship function well. They are very empathetic and understanding, but contrary to the warm and fuzzy stereotypes, also very uncompromising. So I'll put them in sometimes. INFPs can have the same kinds of issues as well, maybe even more so in certain ways. Their identity is always very strong and is something they'll defend, yet simultaneously also amorphous and ever-changing. So they might wake up one day and suddenly feel differently about themselves and their lives. So I'll put them also in sometimes. Okay, ENFJs and ESFJs. Both are likely to gravitate towards being in relationships at any given point, in some form, but I wonder whether those relationships will be likely to be long-term and stable. As I've mentioned before, I think, their issues often ultimately come down to them putting in more effort into the relationships than their partners, which can cause all kinds of problems. Perhaps by the time they get married, though, they'd already have enough experience under their belt to know how to avoid the common problems that would arise. So I'm going to put them both in sometimes. So which type is most likely to be single forever? Absolutely no idea, but let's throw some stupid guesses out there. When I say single forever, I mean not someone who never gets into a relationship, but rather someone who never has a lifelong, successful relationship. So my gut reaction is that it needs to be an introverted type, so we can remove the extroverts right off the bat. This is just from a statistical standpoint. An introvert is going to meet less people, on average, than an extrovert, typically. So by definition, they are choosing a prospective partner from a much smaller sample. As we know, the best or most compatible person picked from a large sample is going to be better, on average, than the person picked from a small sample. Also, if an introverted person gets into a relationship when they are younger, that lasts for a long time, but then breaks down for some reason, having to meet new people later in life, or even just in adulthood, is going to be that much more difficult. It's also probably going to be an introvert that has some kind of issue with people, or will struggle with the conventional demands of relationships. So you could say it will be an introvert and also a thinking type, on average. So we have INTPs, ISTPs, INTJs and ISTJs. Both INTJs and ISTJs are going to have and enjoy a certain level of structure, although for INTJs this often manifests as internal structure, but it can very often be externalized organizational structure too, eventually. So those two types are more likely to have their stuff together than ISTPs and INTPs. It's kind of hard to choose between these two though. There are advantages to SE since you can jump into new things more quickly and take more chances that could pay off. Similarly, if you're stuck in a relationship and need to get out quickly and change your life around, it's also helpful there. But at the same time, INTPs and the SI might be more easily content and comfortable within the stability that a relationship offers. So I'm going to say either ISTPs or INTPs. Feel free to let me know your marriage, divorce, or neither of those stories down below. Also, if you enjoy this ranking video, please like and subscribe. It really helps the video get more views and the channel overall. You can also find a playlist of ranking videos where you can go through all of them I've done. And finally, check out all of the links below, which include my individual social media, as well as the Love Who Discord server, which I'd highly recommend checking out.